the bigger picture of this is you're an outspoken critic of pharmaceutical companies, Big Pharma. What is the biggest problem with Big Pharma and how can it be fixed?
Well, the problem could be fixed through regulation, the problems, but the pharmaceutical industry is I don't want to say, because this is going to seem extreme, that a criminal enterprise, but if you look at the history, that is an applicable description or characterization. For example, the four biggest vaccine makers, Sanofi, Merck, Pfizer, and Glaxo, four companies that make all of the 72 vaccines that are now mandated for effectively mandated for American children. Collectively, those companies have paid $35 billion in criminal penalties and damages in the last decade. And I think since 2000, about 79 billion. So these are the most corrupt companies in the world. And the problem is that they're serial felons. They do this again and again and again. So they did Merck did Vioxx, which Vioxx, they killed people by falsifying science. And they did it. They lied to the public. They said this is a headache medicine and an arthritis painkiller, but they didn't tell people that it also gave you heart attacks. And they knew, we've found when we sued them, the memos from their bean counters saying we're going to kill this many people, but we're still going to make money. So they make those calculations, and those calculations are made very, very regularly. And then, when they get caught, they pay a penalty, and I think they paid about $7 billion for Vioxx, but then they went right back that same year that they paid that penalty. They went back into the same thing again with Gardasil and with a whole lot of other drugs. So the way that the system is set up, the way that it's sold to doctors, the way that nobody ever goes to jail. So there's really no penalty. That it all becomes part of the cost of doing business. And you can see other businesses that if there's no penalty, if there's no real, these are the companies that gave us the opioid epidemic, right? So they knew what was going to happen. And you go and see, there's a documentary, I forget what the name of it is, but it shows exactly what happened. And, they corrupted FDA. They knew that that oxycodone was addictive. They got FDA to tell doctors that it wasn't addictive. They pressured FDA to lie, and they got their way. And this year, they got a whole generation addicted to oxycodone. And now, when they got caught and we made it harder to get oxycodone. And now all those addicted kids are going to fentanyl and dying. And this year it killed 106,000. That's twice as many people who were killed during the 20-year Vietnam War. But in 1 year, twice as many American kids. And they knew it was going to happen. And they did it to make money. So I don't know what you call that other than saying that's, a criminal enterprise.
Was it possible to have, within a capitalist system, to produce medication, to produce drugs at scale in a way that is not corrupt?
Yeah, of course it is.
How?
Through a solid regulatory regimen, where drugs are actually tested. The problem is not the capitalist system. The capitalist system, I have great admiration for love for the capitalist system. It's the greatest economic engine ever devised. But it has to be harnessed to a social purpose. Otherwise, it leads us, down the trail of oligarchy, environmental destruction, and commoditizing, poisoning, and killing human beings. That's what it will do in the end. You need a regulatory structure that is not corrupted by financial entanglements with the industry. And we've set this up the way that that the system is set up today has created this system of regulatory capture on steroids. So almost 50% of FDA's budget comes from pharmaceutical companies. The people who work at FDA are, their money is coming, their salaries are coming from pharma, half their salaries. So they know who their bosses are, and that means getting those drugs done, getting them out the door and approved as quickly as possible. It's called fast track approval, and they pay 50% of FDA's budget. It goes about 45% actually goes to fast track approval.
Do you think money can buy integrity?
Oh yeah, of course it can. In the yeah, I mean, that's not something that is that is controversial. Of course, it will. So, and then
slightly controversial to me. I would like to think that scientists that work
you may
at
not
FDA,
be able to buy your integrity. I'm talking about population wide. I'm not talking about the individual.
but I'd like to believe that scientists. I mean, in general, a career of a scientist is not a very high-paying job. I'd like to believe that people that go into science, that work at FDA, that work at NIH, are doing it for a reason that's not even correlated with money, really.
Yeah. And I think probably that's why they go in there. But scientists are corruptible, and the way that I can tell you that is that I've brought over 500 lawsuits, and almost all of them involve scientific controversies, and there are scientists on both sides in every one. When we sued Monsanto, there was on the Monsanto side there was a Yale scientist, a Stanford scientist, and a Harvard scientist, and on our side there was a Yale, Stanford, and Harvard scientist, and they were saying exactly the opposite things. In fact, there's a word for those kind of scientists who take money for their opinion, and the word is biostitutes. And they are very, very common. And, and I've been dealing with them my whole career. I think it was Upton Sinclair who said that it's very difficult to persuade a man of a fact if the existence of that fact will diminish his salary. And I think that's true for all of us. If we find a way of reconciling ourselves to things that are to truths that actually, and worldviews that actually benefit our salaries. Now, NIH has probably the worst system, which is that scientists who work for NIH itself, which used to be the premier gold standard scientific agency in the world, everybody looked at NIH and today it's just an incubator for pharmaceutical drugs. And that is that gravity of economic self-interest. Because if NIH itself collects royalties, they have margin rights for the patents on all the drugs that they work on. So with the Moderna vaccine, which they promoted incessantly and aggressively, NIH owned 50% of that vaccine and is making billions and billions of dollars on it. And there are at least four scientists that we know of, and probably at least six, at NIH who themselves have margin rights for those patents. So if you are a scientist who work at NIH, you work on a new drug, you then get margin rights and you're entitled to royalties of $150,000 a year forever from that, forever. Your children's children, as long as that product's on the market, you can collect royalties. So you have, the Moderna vaccine is paying for the top people at NIH, some of the top regulators. It's paying for their boats. It's paying for their mortgages. It's paying for their children's education. And, you have to expect that that in those kind of situations, the regulatory function would be subsumed beneath the mercantile ambitions of the agency itself and the individuals who stand to profit enormously from getting a drug to market. Those guys are paid by us, the taxpayer, to find problems with those drugs before they get to market. But if you know that drug is going to pay for your mortgage, you may overlook a little problem, or even a very big one. And that's the problem.